Just a quick disclaimer, if I do sound sick, that's just because I am. So, excuse me for that. Okay, so when I was making the last video, I wondered if there was a serial killer who actually got caught and got away with his murders. So after a little bit of research, I realized that there was a lot of serial killers who got away with murders. Because like the title of this video suggests, the justice system is unjust. With that being said, I stumbled upon one that caught my attention. Let me introduce Pedro Lopez, dubbed most prolific serial killer by none other than Guinness World Records. Pedro Lopez spent most of his life in and out of jail. At 8 years old, he was kicked out of his house when his mother found him fondling his younger sister. While wandering the streets, Pedro Lopez was picked by a pedophile who lured him into his home with the promise of food and a place to stay. Instead, Pedro was taken to an abandoned building and raped repeatedly. After this incident, Pedro joined a street gang of children to protect himself from further predation. The gang would commit petty crimes and smoke a derivative of cocaine. After 4 years of living on the street, Pedro Lopez was taken in by a family from the United States and put in a school for orphans. Not long after though, he ran away. By some accounts, it was because he was molested by a male teacher. Other accounts claim that he ran away with the teacher. Back on the streets at 18 years old, Pedro Lopez started making a living by stealing cars and selling them to local mechanic shops. Eventually, like most criminals, he was caught by the police and sent to prison. While in prison, Lopez was brutally raped by 3 other inmates. In an act of retaliation, Lopez fashioned himself a weapon and killed all 3 of his rapists, one of them with his bare hands. These killings earned him the respect of his fellow inmates, none of which ever tried to harm him again. The killings were also to be considered self-defense by the Colombian justice system, so only 2 years were added to Lopez's sentence. This incident would mark the beginning of the long string of killings and legal free passes that were to come. Once Pedro Lopez was released from prison, he moved to Peru, and his reign of terror ensued. He began kidnapping, raping, and murdering girls with horrendous frequency. At the height of his crime spree, he was apparently murdering around 3 girls per week. Most of his victims were girls between the age of 9 and 12. When asked about his motivation for killing young girls, he said, "I lost my innocence at the age of 8, so I decided to do the same to as many girls as I could." Lopez would stalk his victims from afar, sometimes for several days before making his move, lead them to a secluded place, rape them, and strangle them to death. He would bury their bodies in shallow graves. Sometimes before the bodies had decomposed too much, he would return to the graves, dig them up, and have tea parties with groups of corpses. Lopez claimed that he preferred to kill during the day so that he could see his victims' faces when they died. On one occasion, Lopez was caught in the act of trying to kidnap a girl from one of these communities. The locals beat him, tortured him, and eventually buried him up to his neck. They planned to cover his head in syrup and let ants eat him alive, but he was saved when an ambassador from the United States convinced them to let him go free. On another occasion, in Ecuador this time, Lopez was again caught in the act of trying to kidnap a girl by the girl's mother. When the mother began to shout for help, an angry mob formed that they would lynch Lopez right there on the spot if he hadn't been rescued by police officers. The police officers eventually took Lopez into custody and interrogated him. It was at this point that the true extent of Lopez's crimes was revealed. At first, the interrogators believed that Lopez was part of a gang that had been abducting girls around Ecuador. No one could have imagined that so many missing children could be traced back to a single man. However, Lopez eventually confessed that he had killed one of the missing girls police were looking for. When the officers asked him if he had murdered any more girls, he replied, "Over 200 in Ecuador, some 10s in Peru, and many more in Colombia." Lopez led the authorities to 53 shallow graves that he dug around Ambato, Ecuador, and several more that he'd used to bury victims in other parts of the country. It's believed that he killed at least 110 people, and some estimate are a whole lot higher. Pedro Lopez was sentenced to 16 years in prison, the maximum penalty for murder in Ecuador. He was released 2 years early in 1994 for being a model prisoner and exhibiting good behavior. Within an hour of being released, he was arrested for illegally crossing the border into Ecuador and deported back to his home country of Colombia. In 1995, Pedro Lopez was put on trial in Colombia for murder, but he was declared insane and sent to mental hospital instead of prison. He remained at the hospital for 3 years until 1998, when a second psychological evaluation deemed him sane, and he was released on the condition that he pay $50 bail and report to police monthly. Of course, Lopez never reported to the police. In fact, no one really knows where he is to this day. The last known sighting of Pedro Lopez was by his own mother, who he visited in his hometown of El Español. When he arrived at her house, his mother was sure that Pedro was there to kill her. Instead, he told her to get down on her knees and he gave her a blessing. In 2002, the Colombian government launched an Interpol order of arrest against Lopez for a fresh murder. Rumors say that he's currently living in Tomalia department in Colombia as a homeless man. Others say that the relatives of his victims put a bounty on his head and he was murdered. No one really knows. You may even have walked past the world's most prolific serial killer on the street and had no idea. Okay, so remember in my last video how I said that Albert Fisher was a piece of garbage? By the way, if you haven't seen that video, I definitely recommend you give it a watch. But I think Pedro takes the cake for being the worst human I have ever read of. Not only because of the sheer amount of young girls he murdered, but how he got away with it. Not once, but twice. It's safe to say that I don't think I'll ever hear of someone who's a worse human being. I hope he is somewhere where people know who he is and give him the proper punishment he deserves, because the fact he got away with murdering 300 plus young girls and has been released since the 1990s is just crazy to me. I think they should have compounded his sentence. Better yet, they should have put him on death row. This is a 2-part series, by the way. The next part will be out in a few days, so stay tuned for that. Okay guys, if you enjoyed this video, then a sub to the channel would mean the world to me. A like tells me you like this sort of content. Comment what I should upload next, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.